Let me tell you about a specific kind of humiliation, the quiet kind, the kind that happens on a Tuesday afternoon when someone half your age, someone who has never built anything, never earned anything, never stayed late for anything, looks at you across a desk and tells you after 8 years that your services are no longer required. Not because you failed, not because you underperformed, not because anything you did was wrong, but because his father handed him a company, and you are one of the people who already knew exactly how badly he was going to run it. And that made you inconvenient. Today's story comes from one of the most upvoted posts ever shared on Reddit's r/nuclear revenge, a story that thousands of people read and recognized immediately because most of us, at some point in our lives, have worked somewhere where the wrong person had all the power, and we watched, helplessly, while they made decision after terrible decision, and nobody stopped them. Today's story is about someone who got to watch a little longer than most, and what she saw was everything she had ever wanted to see. Welcome back to Quietly Destroyed. This one has been requested more than any other story since we launched this channel. Get comfortable. You are going to enjoy every single minute of this. Her name on Reddit is Ginger Snap Revenge. I'll call her Ellie. Ellie had worked at a family-owned logistics and procurement company in the north of England for 8 years. 8 years. She had joined at 24 as a junior procurement analyst. By the time this story begins, she was 32, head of procurement, managing supplier relationships worth tens of millions of pounds annually. She knew every contract, every supplier, every clause, in every agreement the company had ever signed. She had built those relationships herself over 8 years through trust, through consistency, through showing up every single time. The company had been founded by a man named Gerald Sr. Gerald Sr. was old school, blunt, fair, demanding, but someone who understood that the people around him were the reason the company worked. He wasn't perfect, but he knew what he had. And he had told Ellie more than once that she was one of the best decisions the company had ever made. And then Gerald Sr. had a heart attack. He survived, but his doctors told him he needed to step back significantly. And so, without any formal succession plan, without any consultation with senior staff, without any consideration of what the company actually needed, Gerald Sr. handed the business to his son, Michael. Now, I want to be fair here. Not every child who inherits a family business is a disaster. Some rise to it, learn, adapt, listen, surround themselves with the people who know more, and trust them. Michael was not that. Michael was 31 years old. He had worked briefly, very briefly, at the company in his 20s for about 11 months before leaving to pursue, in his own words, other ventures. Those ventures, from what Ellie and her colleagues could piece together, had involved a failed streetwear brand, a podcast that lasted 6 episodes, and a brief period describing himself as a consultant on LinkedIn. And now, he was the chief executive officer of a £30 million company. The staff had a saying from almost the day Michael arrived: enjoy it while it lasts. Because everyone, from the finance director to the warehouse team, could see what was happening. Everyone except Michael. Michael's first 3 months as chief executive officer were, in a word, theatrical. He rebranded the company logo without consulting anyone. The new logo was widely agreed terrible. He introduced a new open-door culture policy, which in practice meant that nobody could make any decision without his personal approval, which he was frequently unavailable to give because he arrived at 10, left at 4, and spent significant portions of the working day on his phone. He was not very accessible. He canceled 3 supplier contracts that Ellie had spent months negotiating because he had a contact who could do it cheaper. The contact delivered late, delivered wrong, and caused 2 of the company's largest clients to issue formal complaints within the first 60 days. Ellie flagged it professionally in writing. She documented everything. Michael told her she was resistant to change. She documented that too, every detail, every conversation. Month 4, Michael introduced a new management structure. Several long-standing senior members of staff, people with 15, 20 years of experience, were either moved sideways into irrelevant roles or quietly managed out, replaced by people Michael knew, friends, former colleagues from the failed streetwear brand, someone described only as a guy from my gym. The institutional knowledge that had taken decades to build was being systematically walked out of the door every week, and Michael couldn't see it or didn't care. Ellie watched all of this, documented all of this, and continued doing her job to the highest standard every single day because that is who she was. She protected her supplier relationships. She maintained the contracts she could still control. She kept her team as stable as possible while everything around them shifted. She was, as she had always been, the person holding things together. And then at month 7, Michael called her into his office. Ellie knew, before she sat down, what the meeting was. She had seen it happen to 5 colleagues in the previous 4 months. The closed door, the HR representative already seated, the folder on the desk. She sat down, kept her face completely still. Michael told her, without quite meeting her eyes, that the company was restructuring, that her role was being reshaped, that they were moving in a different direction, strategically. The words were calm, but the meaning was clear. He used the word synergies twice, neither time correctly. And then he slid a letter across the desk, redundancy, 8 years, a settlement figure she knew was legally the minimum they could offer. Effective in 4 weeks, Ellie looked at the letter, looked at Michael, and said, very calmly, "Thank you for letting me know." She signed the acknowledgement form, stood up, shook Michael's hand, and walked back to her desk. She spent her remaining 4 weeks doing something very deliberate. She handed over every file, every contact, every supplier relationship, completely, thoroughly, professionally. She answered every question, trained her replacement, a 25-year-old with 8 months of procurement experience and a connection to Michael that nobody could quite identify precisely. She left nothing undone, and she left nothing behind, not a single note, not a single contact saved to a company device, not a single shortcut or workaround she had built over 8 years that she hadn't formally documented and handed over. Because Ellie, quiet, methodical, completely professional Ellie, understood something about institutional knowledge that Michael was about to learn the hard way. It is extremely easy to remove. It is almost impossible to replace. On her last day, she said goodbye to every single member of her team, individually, went to her car, and drove away. And then she did what she had been planning to do for 4 weeks. Ellie spent 6 weeks doing nothing except resting, which she had not done properly in 8 years. And then she made a phone call to the procurement director of one of the company's oldest and largest suppliers, a woman she had worked with for 6 years. A woman who, when Ellie explained she was now independent, said, "I was wondering when you'd call. We've already had 3 disasters with your replacement. What would it take to bring you on board directly?" That was call 1. In the following 4 weeks, Ellie made 11 more calls to former suppliers, former contacts, people she had built genuine relationships with over 8 years. Not selling herself, just letting them know she was available. 9 of the 11 came back with work. Within 60 days of leaving that company, Ellie was operating as an independent procurement consultant, working with 9 clients, earning more in her first month than she had earned in any single month of her 8 years of employment. She set up her home office, registered her company, opened her business account, and then, for the first time since she had walked out of that building, she allowed herself to check in on Michael's company, not obsessively, just occasionally. The way you might glance at a car crash in your rearview mirror as you drive away. Month 1 after Ellie left, the company lost its second largest client, a client Ellie had managed personally for 6 years. The reason cited in the formal termination letter was a significant deterioration in service quality and account management. Month 2, 3 more senior staff members resigned, including the finance director, who had been with the company for 19 years. He cited, in his resignation letter, an irreversible breakdown in operational governance. Ellie heard about this from a former colleague. She said nothing publicly, just noted it. Month 3, the supplier Michael had brought in, the cheaper contact, failed to deliver on a major contract. The client, one of the company's oldest accounts, filed a formal breach of contract claim. The legal costs alone were significant. Month 4, a story appeared in a regional business publication, not front page, not dramatic, just a small piece noting that the company, which had been a fixture of the regional logistics sector for over 2 decades, was undergoing significant structural challenges following a leadership transition, and Ellie was moving forward, slowly, quietly. Her new business was taking shape, and she was, finally, letting go of the past. Industry insiders, quoted anonymously, described the changes as troubling. Month 5, Michael let go of 12 more members of staff, calling it, for the second time, a restructure. The remaining staff, the ones who hadn't left yet, started leaving voluntarily. Ellie's former team, the warehouse managers, the accounts team, one by one. The people Michael had spent 7 months removing, replacing, and ignoring had been the entire reason the company functioned, and now that they were gone, there was nothing left to hold it together. Month 8, Gerald Sr., who had been recovering quietly, following his doctor's orders, trusting his son, got a call from his accountant. Ellie heard what happened next from 3 separate sources who had been in the building that day. Gerald Sr. arrived at the office on a Monday morning, unannounced, spent 4 hours going through the accounts, and then called Michael into his office. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Michael left the building at lunchtime. He did not come back. Gerald Sr. spent the next 3 months attempting to salvage what remained. He called several people, including, on a Wednesday afternoon, Ellie. She took the call, listened to everything Gerald Sr. said, and then, very kindly, very professionally, she told him she was no longer available, that she had built something of her own now, that she wished him and the company well, and that she hoped things worked out. She meant it. Gerald Sr. said, "I should never have let you go." Ellie said, "You didn't let me go, Gerald, Michael did. There's a difference." And she ended the call. The company did not close. Gerald Sr. managed to stabilize it, just barely, by bringing back 2 of the people Michael had removed. But it was never what it had been. The largest client never came back, the finance director never came back, and Michael went back to LinkedIn, where, Ellie noted, he listed his role at the company as executive leadership and strategic growth. She left him a connection request, and he accepted. She never messaged him, just watched his profile, occasionally, from behind a business that was growing every single month. At the end of her Reddit post, Ellie wrote something that became one of the most shared comments in that thread. She said, "People keep asking me if I'm angry, and the honest answer is, I was. For about 2 weeks, and then I was too busy building something to be angry anymore. Michael didn't fire me, he freed me. He just didn't realize it, and by the time he did, it was far too late to matter." And then, right at the end, she added one line, just one. "The best thing that ever happened to my career was the worst person I ever worked for."